Red Bull Racing just risked locking themselves into 4.5 more years with Max Verstappen, while their own technical director publicly admits he has zero confidence in the car they're currently racing. That is the staggering reality of the new 2030 contract extension announced on August 20, 2026. A deal that replaces his previous 2028 agreement and commits him through the end of the decade, despite Pierre Wache stating only days earlier that the RB22 presents a different problem every single time it hits the track. This is not a celebration of current dominance. It is a massive strategic gamble made while the team's technical leadership openly questions the structural integrity and performance window of their own machinery, creating a high-stakes paradox where the most successful driver-team partnership in modern F1 history is being extended precisely when the on-track product is at its most volatile. But here is the tension that makes this announcement so genuinely surprising, and it is something we need to unpack carefully because the official press release does not tell you this part. Why would a three-time world champion commit to another half-decade with a team whose car both he and his teammate have reportedly felt coming apart during sessions, especially when he had explicitly told Team Principal Laurent Mekies earlier this year that he did not even know if he wanted to stay in Formula One? That question hangs over everything about this deal, because Verstappen was not merely entertaining rival offers from McLaren or Mercedes during the summer rumor cycle. He was actively considering walking away from the sport entirely, and understanding what changed his mind between that moment of genuine existential doubt and this definitive 4.5-year recommitment requires looking past the polished quotes about second families and shared ambition to examine the specific, unglamorous negotiations and regulatory discussions that actually moved the needle. The stakes here extend far beyond simple driver retention. By securing Verstappen through 2030, Red Bull has effectively removed the single biggest leverage point any rival team could have used to destabilize them during the most turbulent technical transition in the sport's history. The 2026 regulations are new, the power unit is now fully in-house under Red Bull Powertrains and Ford following the Honda split, and the RB22 is the first car built entirely under this regime. Wache's blunt assessment that the team is trying to maximize the package but has no confidence in it was reported around August the 13th, roughly 1 week before this contract news broke. That timeline matters enormously. It means Verstappen's decision to re-sign was not contingent on a sudden technical breakthrough or a fixed car. He committed knowing exactly how difficult the current situation is, which raises an even deeper question about what promises or assurances were made behind closed doors that do not appear in any official statement. We know the financial terms remain completely undisclosed, and we do not know if this new deal contains any updated exit clauses like the ones that fueled speculation throughout the summer. What we do know is that the gap between the public optimism of the announcement and the private technical reality is wider than it appears, and bridging that gap required something far more concrete than sentiment alone. The official confirmation landed on August 20, 2026, deliberately timed to coincide with the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, transforming what could have been a standard press release into a symbolic homecoming event that fundamentally reshapes the grid's long-term architecture. This new agreement does not merely add years to an existing arrangement, but completely replaces the previous contract that had been set to expire at the end of 2028, effectively erasing the old timeline and substituting it with a commitment that stretches through the conclusion of the 2030 Formula One season. Laurent Mekies, speaking in an exclusive interview published by Formula One.com, on the day of the announcement, quantified this extension with precise specificity when he described Verstappen as deciding to go another 4.5 years. A phrase that carries significant weight, given the turbulent context surrounding the negotiation period leading up to this moment. 4.5 years. That is the metric. It defines everything now. This specific duration is critical because it bridges the current regulatory era and extends deep into the next technical cycle, signaling a level of institutional alignment that goes far beyond typical driver-team loyalty. Red Bull's official statement framed the renewal as one of the most successful and defining partnerships in F1 history, calling the new deal a powerful statement of mutual trust and ambition, alongside a shared decision to shape the future together. Those words were carefully chosen to project stability after months of intense external noise, yet they also serve as a direct rebuttal to the exit clause speculation and McLaren rumor cycle that had dominated paddock conversation throughout the summer of 2026. By locking in this specific timeframe, both parties have removed the annual uncertainty that had begun to corrode their competitive focus, replacing questions about Verstappen's immediate future with a fixed horizon that allows the engineering and strategy departments to plan resource allocation across multiple regulation sets without the distraction of potential departure scenarios. Verstappen himself addressed the extension directly in comments released through Formula 1.com on the same day, stating simply that he is really pleased with the contract extension and affirming that this remains the ultimate goal that all of us have been working towards. Note the phrasing there. He called it the ultimate goal, not a fallback option or a compromise reached after exhausting other possibilities, which stands in stark contrast to the narrative that had positioned him as a driver actively shopping his services to rival teams. He further emphasized the personal dimension of this professional commitment by declaring that the team is like a second family for me, and I feel very at home. Language that reflects the relational foundation Mekies has cultivated since taking over as team principal from Christian Horner in July 2025. This emotional vocabulary matters because contracts of this length and magnitude are rarely sustained by performance incentives alone. They require a psychological safety net that makes the inevitable technical struggles bearable, especially when the current car is generating such profound internal concern. So where does that leave the broader championship picture right now? The elimination of Verstappen from the 2027 and 2028 driver market creates an immediate vacuum that every other top team must now navigate without the possibility of poaching the sport's benchmark performer. McLaren, who had been persistently rumored as his most likely destination according to prior reporting, must now solidify their own lineup, knowing that the door to Milton Keynes is definitively closed for the foreseeable future. Mercedes faces a similar recalculation, having lost the leverage that comes from keeping a champion's options open during a period of organizational transition. The ripple effects extend down the entire grid, as teams that had been positioning themselves as potential landing spots must now redirect their recruitment strategies toward developing internal talent or targeting drivers from the midfield, rather than chasing a unicorn scenario that no longer exists. Mekies reinforced the strategic finality of this move when he stated in his Formula 1.com exclusive that having Max continue with us and retaining the best driver on the grid is fantastic news, explicitly framing the retention itself as a competitive advantage independent of current car performance. He went further in comments reported by Yahoo Sports and MotorBiscuit, asserting that Verstappen is a lot more than the fastest driver in the world for us, and describing him as the central point of the team. A characterization that elevates his role beyond pure lap time to encompass the organizational identity and technical feedback loop that drives development decisions. This centrality explains why the team was willing to commit through 2030 despite the RB22's documented issues. Losing Verstappen would mean losing the primary sensor through which they interpret and solve the very problems Wache identified. making his presence not just valuable, but structurally necessary for any realistic recovery trajectory. Here is why this actually matters. Verstappen's 4.5-year commitment is not a victory lap, but a high-wire act performed over an abyss of genuine burnout. Because the man who just signed through 2030 had explicitly told Laurent Mekies earlier in the 2026 season that he did not even know if he wanted to stay in Formula One at all. This was not posturing for a better contract or leverage in a negotiation. Multiple outlets, including the race.com and ESPN, documented this admission as evidence of how genuinely open his future was before this recommitment crystallized. The shop value of this deal lies precisely in that gap between existential doubt and long-term certainty, revealing that Red Bull has secured their cornerstone driver not when he was most confident in the project, but when he was closest to walking away from the entire sport. He nearly left, not for McLaren, for nothing. Verstappen addressed this tension directly during the August 20 announcement, joking when asked about rival team conversations that he was closer to retiring than changing teams, a line that ESPN highlighted as the definitive closure to months of transfer speculation. But beneath the humor lies a sobering reality about the psychological toll of competing at this level while managing persistent technical dissatisfaction. He elaborated in comments reported by ESPN that he never felt the desire or need to change to another team to try and win somewhere else, posing the rhetorical question, "If I feel well within the team here, why should I?" That conditional phrasing is doing enormous work. His willingness to commit through 2030 was contingent on feeling well within the team structure, not on the car's current performance metrics. Which means Mekies had to demonstrate something intangible yet essential enough to override Verstappen's earlier uncertainty about whether he belonged in F1 at all. This reframes the entire narrative around driver loyalty in the modern era. We are accustomed to viewing contract extensions as transactions driven by competitive machinery and financial terms. Yet Verstappen's decision suggests that relational trust has become the primary currency in retaining elite talent during periods of regulatory instability. Mekies understood this implicitly, noting in his Formula One.com exclusive that from the very first conversations about the extension to the very last, Verstappen had consistently expressed his desire to stay with Red Bull. That consistency of message, even amid private doubts about his broader F1 future, indicates that his hesitation was never really about Red Bull specifically, but about the sport's capacity to provide meaningful satisfaction under the current technical framework. The team's challenge was therefore twofold: reaffirm their internal culture as a source of fulfillment, while simultaneously demonstrating credible progress toward fixing the external conditions that had made racing feel unsustainable. So what does this tell us about the durability of this new agreement? If Verstappen's commitment is rooted in feeling at home rather than in guaranteed competitiveness, then the team's ability to maintain that emotional infrastructure becomes as critical as their wind tunnel correlation or power unit development. Any erosion of transparency, any breakdown in the open communication he praised, could destabilize the foundation upon which this 4.5-year pledge rests far more quickly than a string of poor results might. This makes Mekies' leadership style not merely a management preference, but a structural component of Red Bull's championship viability, transforming interpersonal dynamics into hard competitive assets that must be maintained with the same rigor as aerodynamic efficiency. The data point that anchors all of this remains Verstappen's own pre-extension admission to Mekies about not knowing if he wanted to continue, a statement that now reads less like a negotiating tactic and more like a genuine inflection point where retirement became a live option. That he moved from that position to signing through 2030 within the same season demonstrates the magnitude of whatever shift occurred internally. making this contract extension one of the most psychologically complex retention stories in recent F1 history, rather than a routine renewal of services.